Welcome to Howler Bike Park, everybody. Thank you for joining us for the 2024 EMTB Shootout presented by Fox Racing and Schwalbe Tires. Today we're going to be talking about the Rocky Mountain Instinct Powerplay C70, the most powerful and, dare I say, fastest uphill climbing e-bike in the shootout. So let's get into it.
Rocky Mountain Instinct Powerplay, definitely an interesting bike, using its own suspension platform with the kind of high pivot idler setup integrated into that Dyname 4.0 drive unit. As Drew said, most powerful in our group test, 700 watts peak power, 108 Newton meters of torque, and it's really a monster on the way up the hill.
720 battery as well.
Yes, I was going to get to that.
Oh, goodness gracious.
This C70 build that we've got here comes in at $9,499. It's definitely got an interesting mix of componentry. You've got a full Shimano Dior XT 12-speed drivetrain and brake set on it, and a fairly basic Fox suspension package with just the performance fork up front and the performance Flotex in the rear. It's yeah, not the most adjustable suspension package, but then I feel like this year on these e-bikes you realize that maybe you don't need all of that adjustment. I would say these still feel to be working pretty damn good.
Yeah, I'd say so for sure. You kind of remove some of that nitpickiness and clicking and clacking around, and you just kind of get your air pressures dialed in. You get that compression on the sweep dialed. You know, volume reducers if you need it for those type of riders, and then after that you just start riding the bike and having fun faster.
Absolutely. And then rounding that out, you've got a race face AR30 wheel set wrapped in our control tires for this group test, the Schwalbe Magic Mary Super Gravities. All in all, definitely a burly build for an all-mountain 140mm travel machine, but definitely one that some of us at least have been enjoying quite a lot.
One last thing I guess to touch on before we head out to the trails is the geometry on the bike. We've got a very in-depth geo chart with all the bikes from the shootout at theloamwolf.com. So if you want to go see all the numbers individually for each bike and how it stacks across the field of bikes, go check that out. But all in all, I think, you know, between having this short and long chainstay and Rocky Mountain's Ride 4 flip chip, which allows you to adjust seat tube angle, bottom bracket height, head tube angle, also slightly modify suspension behaviors. It's a very adjustable bike for how simple maybe the suspension spec is, right? And the lack of adjustments in some settings you have there. You can definitely fine tune the way the bike fits and feels out on the trails. And speaking of, let's go out on the mountain and see just how this thing performs and stacks up in the field. Frozen bananas are a really great dessert.
Again.
And when they're chocolate covered, I think they're pretty sweet. I love this color. Let's get back to the bike, guys.
All right.
Nick, lead it away.
Man,
first thoughts.
Climbing performance on this motor is untouchable in the field. The amount of power this bike can put down when it's working is very good. I would say
it's usually working.
It's usually working. The motor maybe takes a little more maintenance on the chain drive system. The Dyname system has a little bit more complexity maybe than some of the other ones. The only ability to run race face cinch on this bike is maybe a little bit of a downside for me because the crank arms are so long. So that kind of inhibits some of your climbing, but what it makes up for is just its raw power to mash over everything.
And
you can talk to that raw
with
power.
pretty good control as well, I would say, given how much more power it has. I'm the heaviest rider in our test group, 220 pounds, 100 kilos, give or take. And this is the only bike that I can hop onto and feel like I can keep up or even surpass.
Win.
Go up the hills fast.
You were crushing me on some of the climbs.
Right.
Like I was working and you were dropping me.
And when you have this thing turned up all the way to the maximum ludicrous mode +2, you still do need to give it some notion that you want to go fast, but when you do, it will take you up the hill very, very quickly.
Yeah, so 700 watts of peak power. All the other bikes, Bosch, Shimano, SRAM, 600 watts of peak power.
680 on this ramp, but yes.
Yeah, okay. So more peak power and also 108 Newton meters of torque, right, as you said. So way more than all the others.
Yeah.
But I think 700 watts of peak power has given us a overheat issue, right?
We had that once in kind of strange circumstances. Didn't really seem like it was justified. I hadn't been climbing that much within that time frame. Gave me a little warning on the dashboard, which we'll maybe have some video we can insert there. But it was, yeah,
Jumbotron. Jumbotron.
Jumbotron.
Which is sick and
It is
a
very
very
good.
big plus.
Yeah, it is
I like
a good
that.
thing.
Overall integration is very nice on this thing.
But yeah, I do agree. I don't think it was actually heat, although that's what it said it was. Just before, I don't know, 30, 40 minutes before that happened, he was doing his, what do you call it, the Instagram influencer reel thing, where he was just standing and hopping and bouncing on the bike. And something that is a negative on the bike is the way that the torque sensor works. So like, I know we've talked about it and criticized it in previous years. You know, if you get to the top and you just are sitting there waiting for your buddies and your foot's resting on the pedal, or like us, right, we're regularly stopping to film. So you get up somewhere, you stop, you keep a foot on the pedal, you're hanging out talking. It's like surging and wanting to go and drive.
Just excited
and
to drop in, man.
Yes, totally.
It is.
Totally.
But yeah, it's frustrating and something you need to get used to. You basically have to, if you're going to stop and want to rest on the bike, you need to turn it down to a low or no power mode. Definitely frustrating. And then yeah, like you say, when I was hopping around a little bit, not doing anything ridiculous, not exactly doing trials or using the full motor power, it sounded like something slipped in there. It didn't make a nice noise, and then we had to have had a few issues after that from the system.
And we have reached out to Rocky. Sadly, that incident has only just happened just before this. So if we don't get an update in time to get into the video, we'll make a note of it below and hopefully get it in time for our roundtable finale discussion. Ground clearance wise, especially after you flipped it to the low position, the 170 mil cranks did result in a little bit of pedal striking when trying to climb some techie stuff. And I know on the downhill side, that was a little bit of an issue for you too.
Absolutely, yeah. Pedal clearance becomes an issue, but the rest of the geometry, I think, works really well on this bike when it is in that lowest setting, at least for my preferences and the terrain that we've been riding. Low position, lowest BB, slackest head tube angle, but shortest rear end. Overall felt really, really good. 140, 150 bike, does it feel like that to you?
No, to me, it confused me the first time I jumped on it, because this bike charges like one of the biggest bikes we have on test, and kind of just makes you want to do things on it that you are like, wow, how did a 140 trail bike technically just do the thing that I asked it to do, which was pretty impressive. I mean, props to Rocky for designing a suspension that feels fairly bottomless on 140 mil.
I think the mid-high pivot suspension platform, which I'm a fan of, I don't love high pivots, but mid-high pivot bikes I think do a really good job of giving you that real smooth, supple feel and getting the back end out of the way without too many of the drawbacks of the lengthening rear end or the hang up that I think you get when the back of a bike gets longer, right, and the front of the bike keeps going. But yeah, I think this bike erases the chunder, right? Like a lot of roots and embedded rock work here at Howler Bike Park, and it just really does a good job of damping that, especially for a 140 bike out back. I think this bike gives you quite a bit of confidence to, I would say it kind of rides like more planted, you know, even though it's just over, what, 51 pounds, right?
Yeah.
Low, just barely over 51 pounds. It has kind of a ground hugging feel of a heavier bike, especially for a 140 bike, which could be a downside for riders who maybe don't want a, you know, ground and pound kind of a feel. They want something light and boppy that kind of moves and floats around. Certainly can still do it. And I know you push this bike on some really big jumps and big features.
Yeah, it takes the hits pretty well, very, very impressively. I think overall the mentality of this cannot be a 140, 150 bike. even the fork seems to do pretty well, and yeah, I think it's overall maybe a 160 bike would be a more appropriate designation for what this thing rides like. That includes the more playful style of riding where it's not super lightweight and agile feeling on the trail. You can help that with the geometry, the Ride 4 going into steeper settings, but I don't think it ever feels like a really, agile. And
I think the numbers got me confused on this bike because what you see on paper and what the bike rides are totally different bikes to me.
Definitely. This definitely pushes into the light enduro, if not just plain enduro category, I would say. And I don't feel like it holds you back that much over the altitude power play, but then that altitude just does give you that little bit extra buffer, I think.
Who's the ideal consumer?
Ideal consumer, somebody who wants to push fairly hard, somebody who likes a bike that overall tracks fairly well and just wants to be able to put down a huge amount of power, probably not in the chunkiest terrain. This is around about $9,500, and I wouldn't say the value is fantastic for the component spec. I'd say overall the quality is pretty good if you exclude the slight motor issues we've had.
Nick?
I do like the way it descends. It's a fun bike to ride. Again, it's probably not what I prefer in a bike, and looking at the numbers, I would say this is a bike for me, and then I ride it and I don't really love that ground hugging super, it's fast, but it definitely hugs the ground and stays on the ground. And for me, I think it's hard to see spending this much money on a bike that kind of is gunning over its suspension.
I don't have anything that was like a real major drawback. I just didn't quite have anything that made me like yearn to take this bike out other than this color. It did everything well. It never did anything I didn't want it to do or kept me from doing anything, but just, it wasn't like it inspired me to be super like passionate about how this bike performed. And maybe that's because of that ground hugging, thudding performance, which is a really big compliment. So I would say if you're a rider who maybe wants to mute out terrain, like I would say like desert riders would probably really love this. Traction is scarce, bumps are plentiful, and they're sharp. And I think this bike would really allow you to maintain traction and also smooth out that ride. Same goes for like really rooty terrain and rocks. So yeah, I think the right type of rider is really gonna love this bike for sure. Just maybe not the rider who wants to be a little bit up higher in the travel and bopping around quite so much. Thank you guys very much for joining us for the review of the Rocky Mountain. Of course, this is just one of the many bikes in our EMTB Shootout series this year. So make sure you guys subscribe, stay tuned for the rest of the episodes and the grand finale where we put this bike up against all the others in contention and see where it stacks up. Thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you out on the trails.